Let's see if we are live on all of the streams. We are live. Welcome to the real world of real estate. My name is Sean Policino. I'm going to go ahead and start the recording here. Tried a different format here with the live stream. Usually use a program called Restream, and it's been interesting. Welcome. My name is Sean Policino to the real world of real estate. We are broadcasting live on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we are also going to be posting this recording on podcast platforms like iTunes, Spotify, and Amazon Music. So please check us out. We're in our third week here of the show. And today we are talking about what strategies can you use to get your offer accepted in today's crazy market, the market we find ourselves in today, which is unbelievable. Some big news big news yesterday with the Fed raising interest rates. We will talk a little bit about that today and how that impacts the real estate market and real estate business. Just let me go ahead and go to our intro here, and we will see you on the other side. Thank you for that. Anyways, so today in the market, the interest rates, obviously lots of buyers out there are thinking that the market is going to come down. It's going to crash. In many areas, we're experiencing increased appreciation because we're in an inflationary market right now. And so that's impacting everything from household goods to gasoline. All of us are paying a lot more at the pump, and we can see that. It also affects real estate. And so in LA County here, for example, in the last 12 months, we've seen real estate prices go up almost 20% in one 12-month period. Now, average appreciation over 50 years here in LA County is about 6.5% year over year. And so you can go ahead and Google and ask Google, what's the average appreciation in your county or your state, and you'll be able to find those numbers. But in LA County, we see 6.5%. Last 12 months, we've seen almost 20%. Now, inflation is obviously affecting that. And this market in LA, now every market is a little different. You know, even parts of Southern California have different markets where the prices aren't as, the buyer activity is not as aggressive, say in Orange County compared to how it is in LA County. In a normal market, that's the case. You will find even variations county to county or zip code to zip code. You know, obviously there's more people that want to live in, say, Hollywood than there is that would want to live in Van Nuys, California, just for example. Now, if you don't know where those areas are, but it's just not as favorable area, but relatively close geographically. So you have to understand that when you're trying to get your offer accepted, this all comes into play. We are in a very hot market. There's actually a formula for whether we're in a buyer's market or a seller's market. I'm going to share that with you today, because it all it happens to play into the fact, well, if I'm a buyer and I'm looking to buy a home today, what's it going to be like to get my offer accepted? Sorry, you can see that on the screen there. So yeah, there we go. Learning this live broadcast. It's so interesting being live. I start to cough and you guys all get to experience me coughing, and I'm having allergies are really bad right now in Los Angeles. So yesterday the big news was that the federal government raised interest rates. And the reason they raised interest rates is to combat the inflation that's in the market. The inflation is affecting everything. In fact, we just hit an all-time high, 40-year high for inflation. And so if you know much about inflation, is it affects how much our buying power, how much the dollar, the buying power that the dollar has. Okay. And, we are seeing some supply chain issues since COVID. So that has also played into a fact why prices are increasing, but mainly it's the inflation, and the government likes inflation. They don't want to tell you this, but they like inflation because it causes them to have to raise the interest rates to get the inflation to come down. When they raise interest rates, that means more money into the coffers of the government through the bonds. Okay. And they like that because that's the same as raising taxes on people, except they don't have to say they're raising taxes on people. Now, what is this going to do to the real estate market? The fact that the federal government raised the Fed rate doesn't directly impact the mortgage rate, which is what would impact a buyer from buying. If all of a sudden, which we have on our real estate team, we have several buyers right now that are maxed out on what they qualify for. So if the interest rate goes up, it actually affects what they can spend because now their mortgage payment went up and they can't go any higher on their mortgage payment because their debt to income ratio. So it actually decreased their buyer in one buyer's situation, it decreased them by $30,000 just in a quarter point increase. $30,000 in purchasing power he now has less of because of the raise in the interest rate. So that's an example of a direct impact to somebody, a buyer that's trying to buy. Well, how does it affect the seller? Well, on the seller side, if there's less buyers, then homes take longer to sell. And when they take longer to sell, they sit on the market, and therefore the inventory rises, which I'll talk to you about inventory. And what inventory means is the amount of available homes on the market at any given time. We call that our inventory. So if interest rates go up, less buyers can buy. And this, in fact, it helps the inventory rise, which gives buyers more choice, which is a good thing. But if there's too much inventory, it can actually start to impact prices. So what we're seeing right now, and I've got a few guests here. Welcome everybody on Clubhouse. I'm not really sharing my screen today. So if anybody has any questions or would like to talk about a problem they're having or would like to share a story, that's totally fine. I can invite you up on stage. Just raise your hand there in the Clubhouse. And if you're on Zoom, you can reach out to us through the chat session. You can also call me at any time during the show. 818-338-8787 is the phone number to call into the show. And while we're live, we can take those calls. Also, if you'd like to private message me on any one of the channels, you can. We're pretty much on every channel except for TikTok right now. Okay. So back to the topic of, how to get your offer accepted in a crazy market like we find ourselves in. There are a few strategies, like for example, making a really clean offer doesn't seem like something that you put a lot of thought in. If you know your contract and you know how to trim things down in the contract, like your contingency periods that the buyer is going to utilize for inspections, if you bring that date down to the minimum that's needed for example, here in LA, the standard is 17 days for inspection. So when a buyer's agent writes or an agent writes the offer, you can leave that number just as 17 days. Wouldn't think anything of it. But actually, if you bring that number down to 10 days, which is reasonable for the buyer to be able to get a home inspector out to the property and inspect it, and then turn around and make a request to the seller for any repairs, it's reasonable to do that in 10 days. You're not putting the buyer at any risk by shortening it, and you're making it more attractive to the seller. So take a look at what your state, whatever contingencies that your state allows in the contract. In our state, it's inspections, it's reports, it's appraisal. For example, there's a separate contingency to protect the buyer in case the interest rate goes up. And that's a whole separate contingency. It's called prevailing rate. And so if you can eliminate that from your contract and not use that contingency and convince the buyer that, you know what, you're still protected because you have a loan contingency and an inspection contingency, you don't really need this other contingency, which has to do with your interest rate going up. And if we get the agent, the lender to lock your interest rate, then you don't really need this extra contingency around interest rate. Then that makes your offer cleaner. So strategy number one is writing a clean offer. I sell real estate. I sell about 35 to 45 homes a year. 50% of those are listings. So I am a listing agent. I've been doing this for 16 years. I can appreciate it when an agent writes an offer on one of my listings and it's super clean. I can totally appreciate that. And so knowing your contract is the first step in this strategy. You have to know the contract, which means going to contracts class, learning it, reading it yourself, understanding it. If there's a paragraph or a clause or something in there that you don't understand, it means taking the time, going to Google, finding the definition for what that means and understanding it. Your contract is almost like your weapon. I mean, you have to know your weapon in order to be able to use it. So the contingency around interest rate is really not necessary. In the inspection contingency, which in our contract is paragraph 14B1. See, I know the contract. That paragraph, if you read it, says that a buyer can cancel for any reason. And because it doesn't list reasons, it implies for any reason. And so, for example, if some people feng shui, or however you pronounce that, is important. If they buy a home and they don't like the way the sun sets on the property, they can cancel. And I actually use that script when I'm explaining to a buyer the reasons that they can cancel under section 14B1. If that's 10 days, then they can cancel for any reason. If they find out that there's a sexual predator that lives across the street, they can cancel. If they don't like if they realize that the square footage isn't enough and they go in there and they, figure out where they would place their furniture, they can cancel. If they do a home inspection and find out that there's problems with the property, they can walk away from it within that 10-day. So if they get their appraisal done within that 10-day period, do they actually need the appraisal contingency? I would tell you that they don't. As long as that appraisal can be ordered on a rush and submitted to the lender, and the lender has the opportunity to review the appraisal, you could write your offer without an appraisal contingency. This is a huge advantage when writing an offer. The number one reason why in an appreciating market, sellers go with an offer that might even be a little bit less money on the price is because of that appraisal contingency, because they don't want to get tied up in a situation where they have to lower the price because the buyer doesn't have enough money. Okay. So strategy number one is knowing your contract and knowing what contingencies you could remove or keep in, and then advising the client and making the client comfortable with understanding the contract the way you do. Okay. So for example, strategy number two has to do with the contract as well, but I would say that it's more so using the contract the way that benefits the buyer in this negotiation. So for example, let's say the buyer is putting 3.5% down. Okay, that's what they really want to put down. But they have money in a 401k and they have money in a savings account. If you can show that seller that there's more money there, that's going to make your offer look stronger, even though it doesn't put more money in the seller's pocket. It shows stability. So if you say to the buyer, look, I understand that you only want to put 3.5% down, okay, and but you have money in your savings and you have money in your retirement plan where you could actually show the seller that you could put 20% down. Then I'm encouraging you, of course, the buyer has to agree. I would encourage the buyer and you to write the offer with the 20% down. Now, does that put the buyer at risk? Okay, it does not put the buyer at risk. The contract is written that says the buyer has the ability. This is what the buyer is putting forward as their down payment, and they can show proof of funds. But they can rewrite the loan with the lender and show the lender we're only going to put 3% down, 3.5% down. So the loan gets funded at the end with 96.5% from the lender. The seller gets a check at funding from the buyer for the 3.5%, and the lender funds the 96.5, which makes up 100%. The seller gets it all. They don't even realize that you financed it with less. Now, there is a good faith clause in the contract that does say that the buyer is writing the terms of the loan in good faith. But it is possible for the buyer to put 20% down. They don't want to, but they're putting, so it's not in good faith to just show the proof of funds. You could also use gift funds from, if let's say your buyer doesn't have enough money to put down, to enough proof of funds to show the 20%, to use this strategy. You could actually get a gift letter from a family member showing a gift funds to show the proof of funds to put 20% down, write the offer with 20% down. It gets accepted because your price was competitive enough as well. And now your buyer gets into escrow, completes his inspections, gets his loan approved with the lesser down, 3.5%, and turns around and funds the loan like in the example that I just used a minute ago. The seller has no clue. So this is a way you can win the offer. So reducing contingency periods, eliminating contingencies that you don't need, and writing that contract in a super clean way. That's your first strategy. When you add strategy number 2, now writing it with the max amount of down payment that the buyer can show proof of funds for, and then letting them finance for what they want to finance, that's strategy number 2. When you put the two together, you now have a really powerful agreement. So strategy number 3 is even more powerful, and it's called an escalation clause. Strategy number 3, I just used to get an offer accepted yesterday, and that looks like writing in the price that the buyer is making the offer to the seller for. So for example, our offer was the list price was $650. And the listing agent was telling me that they had offers slightly above list. And slightly, in my opinion, is 10,000, 5 to 10,000. If it's any more than 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, that's not really slight, in my opinion. And of course, this depends on the purchase price. If it's a $5 million property, then 10,000 is not even I wouldn't say that. I would say 100,000 is probably not slight if it's a multi-million-dollar property. But back to my example here, 650,000. The agent's telling me that the seller that they currently have, but have not accepted an offer yet. They currently have some offers below list that from investors, and they have some that are slightly over list. Of course, I try to get the listing agent, to tell me exactly, like, hey, could you share me with what it is so I can make the best offer? A lot of times they won't share that information with you, but you could ask them questions like, you don't have to tell me exactly, but is it above list, below list? Is it more than 25,000 over list? Is it less than, you can kind of get an idea what it is at. Then, so I went ahead and wrote the offer at $650, which was the list price, with a clause that said the buyer agrees to pay $5,000 over the seller's highest offer, with proof of a copy of the offer of the competing offer, basically. So buyer agrees to pay $5,000 over the seller's highest offer, with proof of the competing offer. Now, if you want to put a maximum in there, so it would look like this. The language is buyer agrees to pay $5,000 over, not to exceed $670 over the seller's highest competing offer, with proof of that competing offer. So that's the language. It's called an acceleration clause. And when you put that in there, then that means if the seller has an offer at, say, $660, then you agree to pay them $665. If another offer comes in within the negotiation at $670, now you've agreed to pay no more than $670. Okay, and I'm sure you would get a phone call asking if you are willing to go $675, and your buyer might decide to do that. So keep in mind, this acceleration clause, you need to explain up front to the listing agent that you're going to write this with an acceleration clause. There are agents out there that don't understand it, and if they don't explain it to their seller, it could turn them off. It could seem very aggressive. So just be aware that I would explain this up front, and I would say, look, do you think your seller would be okay with me writing in there an acceleration clause for my buyer? What does that mean? Let me explain to you. This is what it means. It means that our buyer would agree to pay you $5,000 over your best offer, not to exceed 680 or 670 or whatever that number is. Or the one that I wrote yesterday that got accepted, the seller was okay with not, the buyer was okay with not putting a not to exceed number. And also what happens is generally you're going to get a counter offer back with that new price and a proof of the offer as you asked for. Your buyer doesn't have to sign that counter offer. So it's a kind of a little tricky way of using the contract to your advantage, which again, if you know your contract, you will find little ways of being able to do this. So again, we're in a market right now, we're in LA anyways, and depending upon what state you're in, I'm hearing that this is happening all over the country. But now that interest rates went up, we're going to see some changes in the market. Going back to what the Fed announced yesterday, is they announced a quarter point federal a quarter point increase in the Fed's rate. The Fed's rate directly affects credit cards, lines of credits, and car loans directly. It does not directly impact mortgage rates, but because Wall Street right now is very concerned with the inflation that is out there being a 40-year high, they wanted the Fed to actually raise rates a half a point. So now that the Fed did not raise the rates a half a point, they only raised the Fed rate a quarter point, we're likely to see the mortgage rates actually go up. They actually went up in advance of the Fed announcing the rate increase, because the Fed was saying they were going to only increase a quarter point, and they wanted rates to increase. They wanted the Fed rate to go up by a half a point to combat the inflation. So the mortgage market, there's a couple websites out there. One is called Black Knight, which gives mortgage industry updates. There's another one called, there's a couple of them. If you put in there mortgage market or mortgage industry updates, you'll find several that give you updates on a regular basis. Lenders use these sites. Real estate agents, not so much. We rely on what our lender tells us. So yesterday in my team meeting, I had a lender come in and actually speak. And if you're interested in being part of our team, you can schedule with me at Calendly, CALENDLY.com/Sean Policino. You can reach out and call me at Sean at 818-338-8787. And we'll talk to you about the things that we do on our team. We generate leads for our agents. We pay for marketing. We provide systems like Mojo and Homes for Heroes for our agents that are on our team. So it's a great atmosphere. You get coaching, free coaching, as well as all of the benefits of EXP, which includes 8 different ways to make money using your license, not just the one, which is selling real estate, representing buyers and sellers and investors. There's 7 other ways. And if you're interested in getting your mortgage license, I have an additional 2 streams of income, which both EXP and Relo, which is the mortgage side, include passive income. Once you build it, you will continue to receive residuals, almost like if you were an artist and you wrote a song and sold that song, or if you're a musician and you sang a song and you sold it, you keep getting residuals every time that got played. We have 2 streams that work the same way. So you can continue to get other sources of income for selling the real estate you're going to sell anyways. So if you're interested in knowing more about that, please let me know. But back to the Fed, what the Fed rate did is, since they didn't raise rates a half a point, we're going to see mortgage rates go up even higher. The Fed also announced that they're going to revisit this monthly and to expect 6 to 7 rate increases over the next until the rest of 2022. This is bad news for agents. It's bad news for sellers. It's most likely going to affect the market in a way that it decreases the buying power of the buyers, which means less buyers, which means inventories will start to rise, which means inflation will come down because of the Fed rate going up. It means the government gets more money in income from selling bonds, because there's now an incentive to buy bonds because the rates have gone up from 0. They've been at near zero for a long time. So this is the way it affects things. So not so great news. We'll have to see what it is. Now, if you're a prospecting agent, which means that you focus on the 5 income generating activities, that's lead generation, lead follow-up, going on appointments, negotiating contracts, and practicing your scripts and dialogues and your presentations. If that's the type of agent you are, and you are an active prospector, not a passive prospector, then you probably won't see a change in your business. Because when you're generating leads, you're generating buyer and seller leads. And in one market where the prices go down because we have more sellers and less buyers, then you will sell more homes because there'll be more listings. And you may sell less buyers because there'll be less buyers. But in the other market, like we're in here, we have less listings and more buyers. If you're a prospecting agent, you can prospect for both, and you can do presentations to both buyers and sellers. So if you have 60-40 and it flips the other way and goes 60-40 sellers instead of 60-40 buyers, then it doesn't really matter in your business. But there are a lot of agents that are not prospectors. They're passive lead generators, which means they do things. Their lead generation strategies are passive in nature. I'll give you an example. An open house is both passive and active. When you go to the open house and you place signs up in the different corners of the streets, people see the sign, they drive into your open house. Maybe you went and actually door knocked the neighborhood and invited people to the open house. That's good too. Maybe you did a Facebook ad asking people to come to the open house. But then at the open house, nobody shows up. That's because it's passive. You have no control over who is going to show up. Now, it's also active because when people do show up, you are actively engaging them. You're getting their contact information. If you leave an open house without the contact information, you have wasted your time. I have actually talked to agents that do this. They go do an open house. They sit there and they greet people. And then they don't ask for their contact information. They don't even have a sign-in sheet. They have no mechanism to capture the information, like a little clipboard where you say, could you fill this out so that the seller has an idea what you liked about the home, and it has a survey about the property, and you can get feedback from actual buyers. And it also asks for their information, and you please make sure they fill it out and make sure they gave you their information. And if they didn't, you ask them for it. That's being proactive, which is one of the 6 personal perspectives, is being proactive. Okay. So the interest rate affects the inventory. Now, people think that being in a buyer's market or a seller's market is a feeling. Like it feels like a buyer's market today. It's not a feeling. There is an actual formula for figuring out what a buyer's market, whether we're in a buyer's market or seller's market. I'm going to share it with you right now. And you can actually verbalize this to a buyer or seller, and they will think you're a genius, because nobody ever realized, most people don't realize that there's actually a formula for figuring this out. It's called absorption rate. Excuse me. If you take the total active inventory in a zip code or a county, you take all the active listings, you go into your MLS and say how many active listings there are in a particular zip code. And then you look at the last 30 days worth of sold properties closed in that same zip code. That tells you how many closed and how many are active. So let's say an example, there's 600 active listings and there's 300 that closed in the last 30 days. If you divide that 300 into 600, it goes in twice. So that's 2 months of inventory. That's called your absorption rate. That's how many homes, and we're talking about single family, condos, we're talking about at all price ranges. You could actually, some people do determine buyer's market versus seller's market or inventory based upon the condo market, condo townhome, and single family. If you wanted to do it that way, you could, but you could look at the whole zip code as a whole and figure out what the absorption rate is at the whole. You could also do it by price bracket, from $1 million and below and $1 million and above. Because those are two different markets, right? There's not a lot of buyers that can buy. The higher the price gets, your buyer pool gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So we just told you how to, and I'll tell you again, just in case you didn't write it down, but absorption rate is the number of homes on the market divided into the number of homes that have closed in the last 30 days. So 600 on the market, 300 that have closed, divided in goes twice, which means 2 months of inventory. If it only went in a half a time, then that's a half a month's worth of inventory. If it went in one time divided by 1, then that would be 1 month of inventory. So here's the truth to this. At a balanced market is when the inventory is between 4 and 6 months. A buyer's market is when the inventory is 6 or more months, and a seller's market is when the inventory is 4 or less months. I'll say that again. A balanced market or a transitional market is when the inventory is between 4 and 6 months. If it's less than 4 months, it's a seller's market. If it's 6 or more months, it's a buyer's market. And in LA, we're sitting probably on average in the whole county of LA, we're probably sitting about 2.5 months of inventory based upon this calculation. But there's a section of LA, Los Angeles County, called Santa Clarita Valley. Santa Clarita Valley, when you look at those zip codes, we are actually in less than a month, a half a month, which is 2 weeks, guys, of inventory. What that means is if no new homes came on the market, it would take 2 weeks for the active ones to be gone. That's the absorption rate. So anytime, if it's 2 months of inventory, what that means is if no new homes came on the market, it would take 2 months for all of the active inventory to be gone. Now, obviously, I don't know of any market where we've had 0 homes come on the market, but I'm sure one day it could happen where it gets very low. As I just gave you the example, Santa Clarita today has 2 weeks of inventory. It's pretty low. So what do you think it's like when you've got a buyer that's working in Santa Clarita and wants to buy a property? You have to explain to them the difference between LA and maybe, between LA proper, where it's 2.5 months of inventory, and what it is in Santa Clarita at 2 weeks of inventory. Obviously, much more aggressive. Now, there is a website called altos.com, ALTOS.com, and you can go there and get a membership. You have to subscribe, where you can get a report that is a really cool graph that shows you almost like a gas gauge of where we are on a seller's market versus a buyer's market. And at 2 months of inventory, we are in a strong seller's market. If we had 3.5 months of inventory, you would see that it would be very close to a balanced market. And then there's a space in there in the middle of that gauge, which talks about it's just very easy to understand what I just explained to you. So I'm hoping that was useful. Remember the 3 strategies, and I'll recap them real quick here. It is writing a clean offer, knowing your contract and writing a clean offer, and eliminating, and understanding the contingencies so that you can do things like reducing contingencies. The second strategy is using your buyer's proof of funds to maximize the down payment. That's the number one reason why a seller picks an offer when it has maybe more down payment, which really doesn't put any more money in their pocket. And if your offer was 10 grand higher, but had a lower down payment, it's a shame that would be the reason that the seller would pick the lower offer. It cost them money and it cost you a transaction. And then the third strategy was using an acceleration clause, understanding it, being able to verbalize it, and telling the seller about it, the seller's agent about it, and the buyer, and explaining, getting everybody on board to why this strategy could be the strategy that wins you that next transaction. If you like the content, please like and share on any one of the platforms you find it on. We're going to try to do this as much live as we can each week. So it gives you the opportunity to call in. Again, my number is 818-338-8787. I hope to soon have a ticker that goes across the bottom so I don't have to keep saying it. And if you'd like to meet with me at any time to talk about why eXp could be the next partner that you partner with, being on the cutting edge of real estate, where we are revolutionizing. We are doing what Netflix did to Blockbuster Video, or what Uber did to the cab company, or what Amazon is doing to the retail markets. eXp is doing to the real estate industry, and what Relo is doing to the mortgage industry. If you're interested in knowing any more about all those things, please reach out to me. Again, you can go to YouTube and watch this video back if you want to take notes. But please like and share if you like the content, and we will see you tomorrow, Friday. Happy Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, right here on any of the channels that you're viewing us on. Talk to you soon, guys. Bye.